Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Rick's Garage. I am of course your host, Rick the Welder, and today is a very exciting episode for a few reasons. First, I finally got the baseline dyno done, and for those of you who may have missed the last episode, my prediction is going to be around 180 to 185 wheel horsepower. It's good to know that my prediction wasn't that far off because the car ended up dynoing out at 186.7 wheel horsepower and 193.7 foot-pounds of torque. Now, if you ask me, that's not too shabby for a 1.5 liter. The other reason for excitement is now that the baseline dyno's finished, we can start work on phase 1 of Miss Vicky's transformation. We're going to start things off with the installation of the 6-piston Wilwood big brake kit that I got through Two-Step Performance. I'll leave a link down in the description for those of you who want to check it out yourselves. But I tell you, I'm getting antsy standing here talking about it, so let's dive in and get started.
Okay, let's get started on the brakes. So there's a few things that need to come apart in order to get the brakes off, and as well a couple of key notes to keep in mind. If you can, try to avoid touching the actual braking surface. Even with gloves, it ends up leaving greasy fingerprints and it can end up fouling up your brake pads. In this particular case, we're replacing everything, so it's not as crucial, but if you're just doing a service like replacing your pad or your caliper, and you're not doing the entire braking system, try to avoid touching what actually is the friction surface. Another thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you have your caliper suspended somehow. If you have the weight of it just dangling on the flex hose, you're going to end up doing some damage and causing a leak later on. Lastly, before we get cracking, I did this off camera, but what you'll want to do is get some way of making sure that the tension is released off of the caliper. Make sure that your master cylinder is closed, because as you compress the caliper, it's going to force fluid back through the line, and if the master cylinder cap is open, you're going to end up making a big mess. Once the tension's been removed off the caliper, your rotor should spin freely. As long as it does that, then your caliper will be able to come off of the rotor without any major problems. Now, if you were just doing a regular brake job where you're replacing the pads and or the calipers, you'd take out these two 14mm bolts and the caliper would come off, and then the frame that aligns all the pads together are removed with these two 17mm bolts. Because everything's going to get changed, I'm just going to be removing the two 17s and taking everything off as one piece. Now that the caliper is hung safely out of the way, you'll notice that there's this Phillips head screw in the rotor itself. And in order to remove that, you're going to need a tool called an impact driver. And this is the correct tool to use for the job. And essentially, all it is a spring-actuated screwdriver. So when you strike it on the back with a hammer, it forces the bit to turn, because there's no way that you can get this off by hand. You'll just end up stripping the fastener and having to drill it out later. It's just a pain in the neck. Save yourself the trouble, get an impact driver. So just line the tool up in the slot, give it a smack with the hammer, and then with a regular screwdriver, you should be able to remove the fastener easily. If the rotor doesn't want to come off with that same hammer, give it a couple of gentle smacks in between the studs. And then slide the rotor off.
Alright, now that I've got one side of the brakes torn apart, let's do a quick comparison between the OE stuff and the new Wilwood goodness. So the factory stuff, pretty straightforward. We've got a standard steel vented disc, a rather large but single piston caliper, pretty beefy, and it'll handle just fine with the amount of go that was designed from the factory. But of course, since we're going to be increasing that a little bit, we're going to need much more stopping power than what this is going to be able to provide us. So let's bring the camera in and take a closer look at the new bits. So obviously final judgment will be reserved for the actual performance of this kit, but I gotta say, so far they're off to a really good start. Everything in this kit just says quality. Everything from, you've got good, nice, solid brackets. You've got a 2-piece rotor. I've gone ahead and obviously bolted these together and wired them up. But I mean, it comes with like hub-centric rings. The calipers are just absolutely beautiful to look at. I mean, that is just a quality part. I've gone ahead and also ordered the stainless steel brake line kit to go along with this as well. Okay, I'm done talking about this stuff. Let's swing around and actually start putting it all on the car. One of the advantages of working on a brand new car is that everything is fresh enough that it still comes apart without too much fight. And thankfully those brakes were no exception. So stay tuned for the next episode, guys, because that's when the real fun begins and we give Miss Vicky some real stopping power.